Welcome to CityWorks, a production of the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies and CUNY TV. I'm Laura Flanders. Every month, CityWorks explores the challenges and lived experiences of working people on the job, at home, and in our communities. Today, we're looking at artificial intelligence, or AI. It's changing our lives from education and science to art and healthcare, and it's developing at a rapid pace. But what exactly is it? And just how is it affecting the way we work? Should we be optimistic or worried about the future with this ever-evolving technology? It is a far-reaching and vital topic. With me today to help unravel the questions at hand are Mikhael Simmonds, as Executive Director of the Center for Community Media at CUNY's Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. Mikhael's been investigating the impact of AI on journalism and media creation. Who or what will even do journalism in this AI-enhanced and automated world, and how will they do it? We're also joined by Professor Virginia Doellgast from Cornell University's School of Industrial and Labor Relations. Dr. Doellgast studies and writes about the effects of AI technologies on work and workers, both here in the US and around the world, and about workers' rights. Will working people have a say in how technologies involving AI are used? Professor Doellgast joins us from Ithaca, New York. Mikhael is with me here in studio. I welcome you both to CityWorks. Mikhael, let's start with you. When we say AI, what do we mean? Are you using it, and if so, how?
Yeah, so AI is a blanket term that a lot of people use to mean very different things, quite frankly. But it is an aspect of computer science. So when we're talking about AI currently, we're usually talking about LLMs, large language models. So you think about the ChatGPTs of the world, you think about Bard, you type in a prompt, gives you something back, right? You say, hey, write me a poem about a dog, it gives you a dog back. What makes this unique and interesting is that it's generative, as in if you give the same prompt, you will not get the same response.
So Virginia, coming to you, we're not talking just about like recognizing patterns or the kind of autofill that we see in our computer software. We're talking about something that, by virtue of being generative, as Mikhael says, could actually be doing work that other people are doing, creative work even.
It's true that this idea of generative AI and the focus on ChatGPT has gotten a lot of attention recently because of all of the applications that we see and because people can access ChatGPT. But I think when I talk to data scientists, they say, well, you know, there's kind of dumb AI and there's smart AI. So you think about chatbots, right? Everybody interacts with chatbots. They can give you very kind of pre-programmed answers, but increasingly those pre-programmed answers can also be learning from where customers are interacting with them in the past.
So I see, very contrasting views of AI. And as we said, some people see this as a fantastic future ahead of us, nobody has to do kind of grunt work. Others see it as a major disruption to the way people work and a real change in expectations around metrics, productivity, you name it. Let's just start with the pros, the in favor, the positives of AI. I was thinking, Mikhael, you and I used to work together, and I thought about what we used to do, and I thought a lot of the kind of annoying work of data collection and moving and design and layout. AI, automated, artificial intelligence platforms can do that in a second. Could they just free us up to do more creative, fantastic stuff?
Yeah, in the ideal world and in reality, they do make our lives easier, aspects of it, right? It cuts down on labor, it cuts down on grunt work. It could also help you augment knowledge that you may not have. So for example, if you get a large data set and you have to sort through that, interacting with this in an easier way, especially if you don't have necessarily a data background, is useful. Right. There's no question about that. But in an ideal world, that frees you up to live more life, right? You are more productive and you can go home at night and not have to spend so much hours, which is in some ways a band-aid to how much work we are asked to do in the modern day. So those are pros, I should say. It also can be used to look at different data sets and look at different communities and try to make it more equitable. But you have to ask that question, right? Because what are these data sets built on? What are these, who is incentivized, right, and who benefits from that? But in reality, especially for a small newsroom that has very few staff, it's basically the last defense to a news desert. This is a godsend.
So you've actually written that this could, as you say, be a real advantage, especially for independent, small, maybe people of color run media outlets that haven't had the chops to be able to do that kind of data crunching up to now, or that kind of reach in terms of information gathering.
Yeah, it just cuts down on your production time, right? Imagine you do all the research for a story, because journalists are laborers, right? Journalists. So you go, you report, you do the research, you gather all this information, you write this story. But now in the modern day, you have to have multiple tweets and multiple promotions and multiple headlines, maybe a translation if your audience is multilingual. This cuts down on the time for you to reach your audience, because you've done all of that work. It helps you with the distribution part.
So, okay, I'm hearing some positives. Coming to you, Virginia. Mikhael mentioned us as workers, and I think we both talked about grunt work. What is the impact on what we might call grunt work? I was just watching people digging in the street and thinking, well, their job isn't going to be replaced by AI if it hasn't been replaced by robots up to now. So is this good for kind of blue-collar manual labor, or scary because now everyone has to interact with AI and there are fewer of those kind of jobs? Which is it?
So for technicians, that's one group of workers I study in the telecom sector. You have basically the applications of AI in ways that help to see if there are network faults, and then to be able to more quickly send out technicians to solve those problems. Or you have technicians who are working in call centers, and they now have a digital assistant that can help lead them through the steps of identifying a problem and solving it for the customer here in the office, instead of having to go out to the home. So
well, that sounds kind of
would
positive.
be one example where you see some of these, concrete jobs being changed a little bit, but also maybe de-skilled in some way. They have a lot of knowledge about how to solve these problems that makes their work valuable and makes their experience valuable. Increasingly, those kind of steps and that knowledge is built into the technology that they're using to help solve the problem. So it's a sort of...
Just sticking with your telecom workers for a second, help me understand, are they getting de-skilled or are they getting upskilled, if you know what I mean?
Okay, I'll walk you through a call center worker,
yeah,
and how some of these technologies might change their jobs. So one way that it changes it is that all of the simple kinds of things that you might call in to a call center to have dealt with, right? Your bills, or solving certain kinds of quick problems, or asking a question, those can be handled now by chatbots or voice bots, or more like automation through AI that you're interacting with as a customer. But at the same time, the customer service agent also has their own little chatbot, their digital AI-powered digital assistant, which is also helping them to answer questions more quickly. So that means that this call center worker, on the one hand, can handle a lot of different questions. They're getting the more complicated questions. You call into your, when you have really complicated problem that you need to have solved. And so they may have to know more things. They may have to look through different databases, but they also can maybe find that information more quickly. And maybe they don't have to have as much experience to be able to solve a problem quickly.
But as you've highlighted in your writing, that might mean just higher productivity expectations. And
yeah. And so that's the second piece, that not only is AI being used to automate work, but a lot of the applications of AI that are the most worrying have to do with management, the way that it's used to monitor workers, to really track everything that they're doing, and to also behind video cameras in the workplace, be
surveillance.
Really,
so coming back to you, Mikhael, there's likely to be a way that this plays out differently in our raced and gendered society. So what are you seeing at that level of kind of whether this is a boon or a disadvantage, apart from what you just said about institutions perhaps being able to see some gains? What about those individual journalists that you work with?
Yeah, so we have to think about the models as who made them, what are the biases of the models. So for example, just to understand, in the case of large language models, they're scraped from the internet, they're scraped from certain websites which have their own biases because society is biased. It's scraped Wikipedia, which is disproportionately male, with male writers. It's scraped from Reddit, which is great and terrible at the same time. So your base information is based on these biases of society. And
So
then
your data set.
your data set is based on biases. And even if you try to put in weights on this to fight against A versus B, it is still a bias of a person creating that, right? So you think about bias on top of biases. So one of the things I recommend that journalists do, especially journalists of color, journalists from underrepresented groups, is take control of this technology.
Oh.
You know, and basically use it to know what its strengths and weaknesses are, especially since it's evolving. Speak about it, push back against it, whether it's to speed up or to slow it down, but to make it more equitable. Because if we know for a fact that these organizations have biases, we know the data set has biases, the question at this point is how do we correct it or slow it down?
All right, so we're going to take the second half of our conversation to talk about that pushback, because I'm hearing engage, don't try to restrict, or at least don't only try to restrict, engage, use, become familiar. And I know that your work, Virginia, has looked very closely at how some organizations, unions, workers' groups have engaged and responded in effective ways. So we're going to take a quick break, but you're watching CityWorks, and we'll be right back.
The CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies is the 25th and newest school under the CUNY umbrella. Dedicated to public service and social justice, the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies offers undergraduate and graduate degrees in the areas of labor studies and urban studies, and certificate programs in labor relations, public administration and public policy, healthcare policy and administration, and community leadership. We pride ourselves on being an institution that brings together activists and academics. Find out more at slu.cuny.edu.
We're back with Mikhael Simmonds, Executive Director of the Center for Community Media at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, and Professor Virginia Doellgast from Cornell University's School of Industrial and Labor Relations. And we're talking about AI, artificial intelligence in the workplace, and what is at stake for workers and the rest of us. Coming back to you, Mikhael, we were talking before the break about the kind of options we've been given so far when it comes to discussing AI in the workplace. It's been kind of restrict or don't restrict, have rules, don't have rules. Surely we can get more subtle than that.
Oh, 100%, 100%. I think, so what I've advised people is read as much as you can and seek advice externally and give guidance internally. You know, different industries have different aspects of ethics, not to say the ethics are different, but just to think about what is thought about in their industries. In journalism, clarity, transparency, trust is part of it. So almost anything that's generated, at least the outlets that are doing anything with AI, it goes through human eyes first. Yeah. That's just part of it. So I think for journalism, we're kind of traumatized, and we should be, given the digital transformation that happened in the last 20 to 25 years. Basically, we as journalists, our job was to create news or report news, report information, and we monetize it by advertising. And then Google came in and said, hey, we're going to monetize information by advertising as well and not pay you fully for it. Right. And we're seeing that happen again with basically AI models taking information from scraping the web and not giving the money back to the workers who produce that reporting, which is, if you're reporting from a war zone, that is you're putting your life in danger. You're in a space getting photographs, talking to people, and then you are not getting paid or equitably paid for that work. So it's not something that we should say, okay, we totally throw it away, but we really have to think about and really start acting and say, this is where it's used, this is how we tell the audience we're using this, while putting in mechanisms in some form to make sure we're compensated for our work.
Virginia, coming to you, it's not as if the US is the first place to be grappling with AI. In fact, we're behind in some senses. Other countries are seeing many more companies already using forms of artificial intelligence. In your research, what have you found about how workers are or are not protecting their workplace, their rights, and their intellectual property?
I think one kind of point to frame this is that unions have been negotiating over technological change for many decades. So often where you see them now trying to adapt to these new AI-based tools, they're often using their experience from the past, or they're trying to kind of change their collective agreements. So for example, in the US, the Communications Workers of America are very present in call centers and technician workplaces and telecommunications, but also in journalism, right? And a lot of new tech workplaces, they're organizing game development studios. And all of these places, you see these kinds of issues around AI coming up. And so in call centers, unions are, right now the CWA has an AI committee that's trying to develop policies in this area. In their existing collective agreements, they have job security agreements, protections around electronic monitoring, negotiating around how cameras are used for workers who are now in their workplace at home, where AI tools are used to monitor them in new ways. And then I've also been looking in Germany. In Germany, of course, you have worker representatives, unions with much stronger rights to negotiate over these technologies, where they actually can hire a consultant to look at how AI is being used. Yeah. And they can negotiate very specific controls where managers can't use these tools in really invasive or discriminatory ways.
There are also lawsuits in the journalism field. Probably people may be aware that the New York Times has joined a lawsuit around this question of the work that their journalists are doing getting scraped by ChatGPT bots and other AI platforms. Do you have high hopes for lawsuits?
Yes and no. Lawsuits take time, and also lawsuits are pursued by organizations that have the money to do so, right? So the goal is basically, at the end of the day, to have journalists compensated for their work, whatever form or structure that takes. I hope that this lawsuit helps with the industry standard. They have other industries that have standard for use already. If you think about music, you have licensing agreements. This is nothing new. For radio stations, you buy into license agreements and you could play music and you pay back into this pool. So there are different mechanisms to get to that point. If this lawsuit gets us there, great. If another policy gets us there, that's also great. We just have to keep in mind, though, that a lot of these structures, or at least the ones proposed by tech companies, gives them the advantage of creating a moat within themselves. Right. So even if they become a honest player moving forward, and I'm not saying they would do that, but if they did, they still have the advantage of having done all of this scraping and doing all of this base work for the last 6, 7, 8 years.
And just to go back to the race question again for a second, we have had, what would you say, 3 decades possibly of DEI and sort of efforts to diversify curricula and workplaces. You now see a massive pushback. We just lived through the pushback against the presidents of elite universities. Mm-hmm. We've got, I think, 7 states have banned DEI in different corporations. So all of which is to say, is this moving too quickly for where we as a society are moving in terms of adjusting from a kind of white supremacist male culture and body of history and knowledge to something that actually represented reality?
I would say speed is important. Yes, we're moving too quickly, but we're not moving equitably, because you can move slow and still have the same problem, right? So the speed is a secondary factor. The question is, who's in the room? What are their ethics? How are we thinking about inclusion across the board? And that being said, you can't have a more ethical tracking of workers in an unethical way, right? So your cameras could take up more wider spectrum, so you could get darker skin, for example, but if you're still tracking workers in a terrible way, it's like,
right.
Great, you're doing that thing in a better way, I guess. So you really have to, speed is the byproduct, but really ask yourself, who's in the room? What is this for?
Yeah.
Who benefits from this? Who does not?
Well, that goes back to voice. And I always feel in these conversations, I just have to stand up for the Luddites, because Luddites are given a really bad rep in these conversations around technology. And we have to remember that those folks who were spinners in the early industrial age did everything they could to have a voice in modernization as machines came in, and were ignored at every turn. Only then did they start breaking machines. Okay, that's it for the Luddites. But what I hear from you, Virginia, is it is about having a say and having an organized say. How are you feeling? Are you feeling that kind of optimism we talked about at the beginning, or a bit of a kind of impending doom?
I mean, I'm feeling optimism. We have the Writers Guild and SAG-AFTRA in the US negotiating agreements that do, in a way, I think the most important aspect of some of these AI agreements for the writers and actors have been that they actually give a precedent that unions can negotiate agreements and rules over how AI is used at work. So you have in the Writers Guild specific rules around the ability of writers to have control over their work, that you're not going to make these AI generated scripts and then just have writers come on. So it's a way coming up with reasonable rules where writers can use the tools in a positive, productive way, but not have their own work degraded as a result or de-skilled in a way.
Right. This has implications then for education.
Oh, 100%. I mean, let's think about you mentioned grunt work before, right? A lot of skilled workers of any industry got good because they did grunt work. Right? This is how you have to, in journalism, you have to do that breaking story, who, what, when, why, how. In any other industry, you just have to do that basic work, and then you get the nuance and skill, and your humanity comes into that work. Now that entire class of work may disappear in different ways because AI is getting into that. So we now have to adapt how we're teaching and how we're learning. And on top of that, we're talking about blue collar, but white collar workers are actually really hit by this more than blue collar. But blue collar workers had to think about this, think about car workers, for example, for a while now. What really happened in the last 2 years is that white collar workers are like, oh wait, my job could be automated too, like
your doctor
lawyers.
could be somewhere far else.
Exactly. So the education system has to adapt. I don't think it's impossible that it would, but it has to. You have to think about how you are teaching and how people learn.
With all of this moving so quickly, there are a lot of unknowns, but one of the knowns, it seems to me, is that there are environmental impacts to all of this, because all these computers doing all this data crunching and AI generative work are using enormous amounts of energy and sitting in enormous warehouses, which are not as small as your phone, even though we're constantly being told how small it all is. Is that something that is ringing alarm bells in the way that it should, Mikhael?
It's not loud enough, and we need to talk about it more. And this is not an AI problem. Specifically, it's a cloud problem or just computing problem. If we want it to be bigger and faster, as you mentioned before, bigger and faster, what should we do this? That means you're going to use more energy, and we know how energy is run in most parts of the world. Petrochemicals spit that out, and cooling, which is water mostly. And when you think about how much you're burning and where you're taking the water from, it's usually the communities that are least powerful are mostly affected, right? In thinking about where are these data centers, how are you cooling it, who has control over water. So a lot of these topics that come out of AI and tech companies are actually not new, it's just exacerbated because these things have existed for a while. And I'll give you another quick example about workers. When you think about tagging and getting a bunch of data set, that was done by people who had to look at images, good and bad, hours and hours and hours, right? So that's not environmental, that's mental health. On top of that too, there are humans behind all of this. So in thinking about that environmental impact or the worker impact, it's really taking a step back and saying, oh wait, this is actually a systemic problem we have, and AI is just stepping into the system we have already.
And one of those systemic already existing problems is the problem of the supply chain for all the computer technology that we're talking about and the mineral sourcing and all of that. We have like 40 seconds left, Virginia. Is there anything you want to add?
Just building on that point, if we think about the AI supply chain, you have workers in the global south, right? Kenyan workers who are labeling text used to train ChatGPT under low pay, intense, insecure working conditions. These are also the kinds of supply chain impacts beyond the resource and mineral ones.
Well, clearly we could do at least one more episode on this, if not like a whole year's worth. But I thank you both so much. Thank you, Mikhael Simmonds, Virginia Doellgast. Wonderful speaking with you. Really important topic. That's it for CityWorks this time. If you have comments or questions, you can write to us at cityworks@slu.cuny.edu. And for the meantime, at least I promise we will read those emails. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for watching.